generally started in Italy. And even those words like cantata, oratorio, opera itself reflect their Italian origins. But what happens in Italy doesn't stay in Italy, and this stuff makes it around the entire continent of Europe um, pretty rapidly for the standards of the era. So let's talk about hello the changes that are happening throughout the Baroque era that make these ideas flourish and spread. We said that the Baroque era initiates the age of affect. Somebody remind me what the age of affect is.
Is it like the return to the idea that music can like influence emotional well-being or emotional states?
Precisely. It's going back to that ancient Greek belief about the arts, usually based on rhetoric, that the purpose of art is to influence your emotions, edify you by making you feel the right things. So the beginning of the Baroque is all about emotional response. But larger philosophical trends, especially the predominance of humanism, really change the way that artists start to think about emotions and art's purpose. So remember that humanism is the idea that man is the measure of the universe. Humanists reverence the mental capacity of humans. Hey, that's what separates us from the animals, right? Um, we're also looking at ancient Greek beliefs about natural law and rational order. In other words, humans are born with an innate sense of right and wrong and moral duty. And because of that nobility, not the socioeconomic nobility, but ethical, nobility that is born into us, humans are supreme among everything on earth. And this is the defining feature of humanism, that man is the measure of the universe. Because of this reverence for man's mental capacity, we start to see increased emphasis on empiricism, the ability to observe something, physically see it, sense it through any of your five senses. Um, Science, observation, categorization. So the later Baroque era, so we're shifting from the early Baroque to the late Baroque here. In the later Baroque period, we start to see the scientific method emerge, the use of inductive and deductive logic. And this is the first time that humans believed we could understand the entire natural universe through observation. There's an impetus towards the invention and collation of dictionaries and encyclopedias. Dictionaries and encyclopedias didn't exist before the later Baroque era. And the goal of these types of resource materials is being comprehensive, naming everything, categorizing everything, observing everything. We are using our reason to describe and define. That description and definition is what allows logic and reason to take over. Socially, we also see a rejection of spiritual authorities and churches in general. In the late Baroque era, we see a dramatic weakening of church influence. So because thinkers now put man at the center of the universe, God is not at the center of the universe. Because we rely on empirical observation, there's this increasing doubt that miracles actually happen. So there's a sea change in the way humanity views the world and the way humanity views itself. And that's the mindset that people have as we're looking at these new types of music that are emerging. Okay. Does everyone feel comfortable with that? Does everyone understand what's going on here? Thumbs or hands? Okay, good, good, good. I'm seeing some more thumbs. Good. So, as I said, these philosophies are promoting, fostering the adoption of those genres that we talked about throughout Europe. And the first to adopt those vocal genres was France. So just a little bit about France in general before we talk about their adoption of opera. French royalty was heavily invested in ballet for several years prior to the birth of opera. We're talking about the court of Louis XIV, the Sun King, and his use of ballet as a form of social control. So Louis XIV, does anyone know why they called him the Sun King?
I don't remember exactly why, but I do remember reading about it. So if you can refresh us on that.
Absolutely. They called Louis XIV the Sun King in France because the universe revolved around him. And it's that straightforward. Sorry, I'm going to adjust my camera. I feel like I'm like Izzy looking over the wall right now. Good. So that is Louis XIV's court. And what he does is he uses dance at that autocratic court as a form of social control. How? Because if your nobles are busy dancing, they can't plot against you. They don't have time to disagree with you. They don't have time to fight you because they're busy dancing. So ballet is the top priority of Louis XIV's autocratic reign. Also, this ballet is the site of spectacle. We talked about that with the invention of opera. This is both opera and ballet were courtly genres. So they are a way for wealthy people to show off their finances. They're a way to pour money into something that everybody is then like basically forced to sit through and watch. Likewise, if you get an invitation to these things, that's a statement of social significance. It's just like being invited to the cool kids party in middle school. If you don't get an invitation from Tiffany, then oh my gosh, my whole life is ruined. And it was the same at Louis XIV's court. Because of this great emphasis on spectacle and a demonstration of wealth, we start to see the same Deus ex machina principle in French ballet that we saw in Italian opera. Someone remind me what Deus ex machina is. Someone I haven't heard from in a while. I want to hear some interesting voices.
I'm sorry, I was grabbing some food. What was the question?
Somebody remind me what a Deus ex machina is.
Um, I I can't remember the exact definition, but isn't it something that's like, I don't want to say random, but like um not foreseen, kind of like an unexpected occurrence or something like that?
That's exactly it. It's this random, unexpected plot twist. Usually, Deus ex machina, literally God in a machine or God from a machine. You can say either way. But yeah, John, it's exactly that. This God appears, waves their magic wand, and the plot changes suddenly to a happy ending without any connection to previous events. The God just magically shows up at exactly the right time just because, oh, it's about time for dinner and we should all get home now. So I suppose I should have a God come and wrap this up. Yeah, exactly. That's it. So Deus ex machina, God
I've
from a
heard
machine.
that. I realize people talk about this in movies all the time. Like they use it like they reference like things that like coincidentally happen that are just like very convenient. It's like, oh wow, perfect. Like like something just completely like covers all the holes. Like yeah,
100%. This still happens in especially a lot of action movies. Um, yeah, which I suppose are also a site of modern spectacle. Um, yeah, exactly. This stuff still goes on. And today we don't necessarily need a god to do it. We've broadened the definition of the term. It doesn't have to be a god coming down. But yeah, it could be Ant-Man making the right choice all of a sudden. It could be whatever it could be. It's just that random occurrence.
In the first Avengers movie, when all of the like, I don't even know. I think they're called Jatari or something, but like they all just like conveniently die, a la the Phantom Menace, when like the main thing gets destroyed.
also if
I
it still needs more examples, Phineas and Ferb at the end of literally every episode.
Okay, but like that's self-aware. Like,
That's true, that's true.
well, and to be fair, it can be self-aware. Yep, Jake is making the same connection. Um, it definitely can be self-aware in some of these newer genres where it's like, we know this is kind of absurd, but this is the convention, so we're gonna do it. Those are great examples. Exactly. Okay, so everyone, now that you have those examples, you have that concrete idea in your head. That's Deus Ex Machina. And all of those things that you notice, all of those things we just mentioned, as you notice, require some form of spectacle. And how do we make spectacles happen? By pouring a lot of money into it. Who can pour a lot of money into it? Louis XIV, the Sun King. So those Deus Ex Machina plot twists were a huge part of both ballet and the adoption of French opera. Now, how do the French go from ballet purists to, hey, let's sing things? Well, a lot of it has to do with the presence of a guy named, he was a cardinal, so he was part of the Catholic hierarchy, Cardinal Jules Mazarin. Now, I'll give you a hint. Jules Mazarin was not born Jules Mazarin. He was born Giulio Mazzarini. So he, as an Italian cardinal, transplanted into the French court, is like, hey, you know what we could really use here? Operas. So he commissioned operas to be performed at the French court. And we see throughout a lot of French history, quite frankly, look at Joan of Arc, we see this strong association between the crown and religious authority. But now there's this new added piece of the puzzle, an association between the crown and the Royal Opera Company. And in fact, many nations still, this is not something unique to France, many nations still have royal, like Covent Garden in England, the Royal Opera Company. So an association with an association between opera and a royal court is kind of a defining feature of opera. And the first opera that really got things going off the ground was in 1671. So notice we said the Baroque era starts around the year 1600. This is several decades on. This is a lifetime later. So 1671, we see a piece called Pomone by Robert Cambert. And this Pomone inaugurated the Paris Opera. Again, Paris Opera directly sponsored by the Crown, and sparked French interest in the genre. Now, Pomone only survives in fragments. We just have the overture and a couple of scenes today. So we don't know exactly what the whole thing sounded like, but from those fragments, we can see the strong connection between Pomone and what came next that we still do have. And the people who take this genre and run with it to the point of defining it are of course, Jean-Baptiste Lully. Now, Lully, again, just like Jules Mazarin was born Giulio Mazzarini, Jean-Baptiste Lully was born Giovanni Battista Lully in Florence. He was Florentine, the home of the, what's that club called? Dora. It begins with a C.
Oh, never mind. I was about to throw out a guess, but it does not begin with a C.
Oh, well, no, what's your guess, Mark? Maybe it can lead us to the right word.
The Fabio Armonici.
Ooh, okay, yeah. The Fabio Armonici were touring musicians. Good. And they picked up the idea that this group came from, and they brought this idea all around Italy. So the Fabio Armonici are not totally unrelated. But the Fabio Armonici got this idea from a club, a kind of academy in Florence. I feel like retention will be stronger if it comes from one of you guys.
Honestly, I do like, I'm looking through my notes. I'm trying to remember and I have no idea.
Okay, the Camerata. Everybody put Camerata in your notes right now. Florentine Camerata. These guys are hugely important. Remember, we said like rarely in music history, very, very, very rarely can I ever point to a specific group of people in a specific time and place and say, ah, they invented something. But the Florentine Camerata inventing opera is one of a handful of times when I can actually do that. So we need to know Florentine Camerata, Camerata, hugely important. So Lully is born and raised in Florence, the home of the Camerata. So what he does is takes this dramatic music, he takes the invention of the Camerata, and he makes it French by combining spoken tragedy. So like the French plays, like Racine, Jean-Jacques Racine would have written. And he takes those spoken plays plus the Florentine opera music, plus French ballet. It's like three things in one. You got to be a triple threat, an actor, a singer, and a dancer. He takes those three things and rolls them into one and calls it tragedy en musique. So tragedy in music. Later, we start to refer to that as tragedy lyrique, lyric tragedy. Those terms are interchangeable and they mean the same thing. A tragedy en musique is a tragedy lyrique. They are exact synonyms. So that should be in your notes. Please put the phrases tragedy en musique and tragedy lyrique in your notes. Those are important vocab words. Yes. And Lully is doing this under Louis XIV. So Lully is combining these genres, the spoken play plus the ballet plus the opera. He's combining this to invent tragedy en musique under the Sun King. Now, a generation later, we start to see Jean-Philippe Rameau. Now, Rameau is native French, so he is culturally and he's steeped in Lully's tradition. And he comes a generation later. Now, Rameau, at the end of his career, turns theorist as much as composer. And once Rameau had established himself as a composer, he wrote these treatises that defined what French opera should be. And I'm going to put air quotes around that because what should any music be, you know? Rameau really codifies in writing, in concrete language that we still have today. He codifies the ideal of French opera. Now, what this does is set off a pamphlet war between the supporters of Rameau and the older holdouts who were fans of Lully. So the new guys, the Ramistes, named after Rameau, were fighting the Lullistes, named after Lully. So we've got a pamphlet war going on a generation after Lully. And we'll talk a little bit more about what's igniting that later in this class. But before we do that, I want to talk about a performance reality of these operas. So we've mentioned castrati before because they existed in Italy, and Italy kind of was the center of where castrati took hold. Remember, these are very talented young boys who had a surgery performed before adolescence so that their voices never changed. And they could keep singing in a treble register even as their lungs and bodies grew. Now, this was a practice, the surgical procedure was a practice that began in the mid 1500s, but it reached the height of popularity in the 16 and 1700s. So it began towards the end of the Renaissance, but it became the fad in the Baroque era. Now, here's the problem. At no point in time, anywhere in Italy, was that surgical procedure legal. Let that sink in just a second. Open the door and bring that sink inside. Let that sink in. At no point in time was it legal to turn a child into a castrato singer. So what these families would do, and actually what everyone around them would do, there was this polite fiction that, oh my gosh, all these boys just happened to undergo tragic accidents in their childhood. But isn't it convenient that even though they underwent these tragic accidents, they have really great voices? So castrato or castrati were a crucial part of Baroque opera. And yet there's this this kind of like fictional game we have to play around them. And scientifically, it's not just the voice that's being altered. Because they never really went through puberty, their hormones never stopped doing what hormones do. So this resulted in barrel chests that could hold more air than usual. So these castrati were known for long, mellifluous phrases. If you ever read or sing something that's written for a castrato, you better be ready to breathe. A lot of times today, this falls on the mezzo sopranos, right? Because the mezzos take over the role, or countertenors. And you better be ready to do some diaphragmatic breathing if you sing a part written for a castrato. This also, because their hormones never stopped hormoning, they just kept growing and growing and growing. So castrati were very tall. This is great for opera because they can play these ginormous heroes and gods on stage. They have a very commanding physical presence, combined with this ethereal voice. Now, like I said, the surgery was never legal, so it's a really iffy practice, but these guys were absolute rock stars. And in fact, we see the rise of, we're all familiar with the phrase prima donna, first lady. In the Baroque era, when castrati were the it thing, or the it people, I should say, we see actually primo uomo, first man, taking much more importance than the women on stage. Opera was about these castrati singers, and they had legendary careers. Senesino and Farinelli both had transnational careers. Both of them worked with Handel in England and Germany. They worked in France and Italy. So these guys toured the continent like they were the Rolling Stones. And everybody adored them. To give you a sense of what this actually sounds like, I've got a little video here of the last surviving castrato. He actually survived well into the 20th century. I think in the 1920s he died, which means we have a recording of him. So just to give you a sense of what this sounds like, I want to play a little bit of Alessandro Moreschi's singing. Now, keep in mind, he was doing this as a very old man. He was very, very, very old when this was recorded. So it's probably not reflective of him at the height of his powers, but you'll get a sense of the range and timbre nonetheless. So here's Alessandro Moreschi in the 20s. Okay. Oh, no way, that is him. Indeed, Perla. Indeed.
That was so beautiful because a it felt like a kid singing, but it was an old man, but it was also a man, not a woman. Like it was so hard to imagine in my head. Like,
Like I don't know how to feel about this.
I mean,
Like
I get his voice was a little bit shaky because he was really, really old. But it makes me very curious to hear what it would sound like as a young person. Like, oh man, that's weird.
I mean, think about it. They've got the vocal cords of a boy, but the muscles of a man. It's a trippy combination. It was shaky at points, but yeah. Well, and you know what, Maya? A lot of it too is the recording technology. So don't blame Moreschi's age entirely for the shakiness you're hearing. A lot of that is he's being recorded on a wax cylinder. Has anybody seen those wax cylinders before? Yes, okay. So you guys know the type of technology I'm talking about. And oh, he was recorded on a toaster. Not a toaster. It was an actual cylinder made of wax. Oh, yeah. So yeah, a wax cylinder that it kind of works the same way as vinyl does, where you've got a needle carving grooves into the wax on a printer. Guys, I think it was my microwave, actually. You're all wrong. It was my microwave. But no, in all seriousness, it works very similar to the way vinyl works, where it's a needle carving grooves into it. But instead of being a disc, a flat round thing, it was a cylinder that would rotate on this spool. And yeah, not great fidelity, as you can tell. So yeah, part of that is also just the technology in addition to his age. So anyway, long story short, that is castrato singing. That is what they sound like. Any other reactions? Okay, let's hop on then to French opera between these two guys, Lully and Rameau. Let's talk about what each was known for and how each was different. So under Lully, notice he lived 1632 to 87. So he's like smack dab in the middle of the 17th century. He would have, in his childhood, experienced the tail end of the Florentine Camerata's influence, and he would have been raised in that era of burgeoning opera. So he entered the court of Louis XIV as a violinist, and as such, he would have been expected to compose dance music. He started out composing ballets for the Sun King. That would have been his job. But he also collaborated with poets like Moliere and Quinault. Now, Moliere is known for these biting, witty satires. I'm sorry, I'm teaching a class now. Would you be able to come back later? Okay, sorry, guys. Yes, where were we? Moliere was known for biting, witty satires and comedies. This is the age of Voltaire, right? In the country of Voltaire. We also see Quinault, who's known for more of the tragic genre. So he's doing something a little more genuinely dramatic. And what Lully does with both of these poets and playwrights is collaborate on that new kind of dramatic genre, the tragedy en musique. Later, the tragedy lyrique. Again, same thing. And they're writing these pieces, they're writing these tragedies en musique for the Académie Royale, the Royal Academy. This academy had a monopoly on ballet and opera and tragedies en musique. All of these works were written for the same group of people. So the resulting genre, these tragedies en musique, were longer than Italian opera. These were entire evenings of entertainment. You went for hours. They would be 5 acts long. So again, much longer than Italian stuff. They would mix dance, orchestral music, spoken dialogue, and singing. Now, here's the interesting thing about tragedies en musique. The audience often joined in. The French felt much freer to be a participatory audience. Another thing that distinguishes French opera from Italian opera is French recitative. Remember, in Italian opera, we had recitativo secco, that's dry recitative. Somebody remind me what recitativo secco is.
Wait, does it have to do with like sounding like speech?
Yes. Yeah. Well, and all recit sounds like speech, right? That's yep. Okay. So
Well, I
recitative.
don't remember much else. I just remember that.
Okay. Is everybody else pretty much in the same boat? Okay, good. Okay. So put this in your notes, guys. Make sure you have this in your notes. Recitativo secco means dry recitative. It is only accompanied by basso continuo. It is much less melodic. It's much more recitational. That's why it's called dry, just basso continuo, with the continuo chiming in on only important words. Recitativo accompagnato, let's just look at that word, accompagnato. What do you think, based on that word, that recitativo accompagnato is?
It has accompaniment of some sort.
Exactly, the whole orchestra is accompanying the voice in recitativo accompagnato. Good, Maya's got it too. So The difference between recitativo secco and recitativo accompagnato is the type of accompaniment. If you just have continuo, it's secco. If you have the whole orchestra, it's accompagnato. So the French have something similar. Instead of secco and accompagnato, they have what they call simple, simple, and mesure, measured. Now, there's an added component of meter in here in the French version. So recitative simple is unmeasured, unmetered. It doesn't have a strict time. And recitative mesure does. Does that make sense to everyone? Can I get thumbs or hands? Cool. Okay. So is that going in your notes?
Metered and unmetered recitative, pretty much.
Basically, simple versus mesure. And these different types of recitative, whether it was simple or mesure, were in what we call Alexandrines, and that's a French poetic meter. You don't have to memorize what the meter is, but I want you to recognize that the meter is different from Italian opera and Italian recitative. Because remember, Italian recitative is in versi sciolti, free verse. There is no meter in Italian recitative. Those are free verses where the syllables don't have a specific pattern. In French recitative, they're using Alexandrines. Okay, do we all feel good about French recit versus Italian recit? Can I get another thumb or hand set? Okay, holla. So the next big difference between French opera and Italian opera is the presence of, well, of ballet. So we call these specific ballet portions divertissements or divertissement. Now, a diversion or divertissement is this sounds negative, and I don't mean it to be negative. It's a distraction, right? It's taking your attention away from the main story. And that's exactly what happens in divertissements. So in these little sections here, we would see a divertissement in every single act. So there are 5 acts. I'm going to have 5 divertissements. And each of these interruptions would consist of a ballet and an aria by a secondary character. So not one of the principals. I would just have a secondary character pop out to sing some little ditty. So that's my divertissement, ballet plus aria by a secondary character. Why do we say these divertissements are distractions? They don't advance the plot at all. These things are usually unrelated to the larger action. We interrupt the action to bring you this dance. Filler episode, it kind of is. It's the car chases in every Fast and Furious. Well, no, the car chases are the point of Fast and Furious. What would be a better example? I don't know, the car chases in Die Hard. I don't know. So the point being, it is a filler episode. Good. Oh. Red versus blue. Wait, I'm unfamiliar with this, red versus blue. Is this something I should know about?
Not particularly. As far as I know, it was like an internet animated series that used like character models from the Xbox game Halo, and it's just like kind of a comedy bit.
Okay, I'm interested. You kids today and your googly docs and all that fun stuff. Okay. So I will take your word for it that red versus blue is the precise example, and I trust you. Another difference between French opera and Italian opera is that French did not use arias as we think of them, like with Monteverdi, but they had these shorter, simpler, they call them airs. And these are meant to be singable, and that's where the audience participation comes in. There would be these short, simple songs. Again, when I say ditty, I don't mean to be dismissive. I mean, like, it's really just a pleasant tune that everyone can partake in. So French opera employed airs rather than arias. Okay. Now, the biggest thing of all, I saved the big finale for last, and that is the French overture. You all probably know that an overture is the orchestral thing that comes before the opera itself. And that still holds up even way back in Baroque France. The French overture preceded the opera, and it had a very strict form. It was in two parts. We have two halves. There would be a double dotted slow march. Does anyone know what I mean when I say double dotted?
You saying like it's add half and add another half of that, like literally like double dotted note? Okay.
Literally double dotted notes. Yes, good. Okay. So you guys got it. So we would have this march using double dotted rhythms to kick us off. And why would we do that? Because it was for the king's entrance. As the king strolls into the theater, we should all be paying attention to his stately procession. Okay, so we give him this double dotted slow march to kick us off. And the second part of it is a presto fugue that's meant to dazzle. This highly imitative counterpoint that just goes by so fast that we are, it's just blistering and meant to stun us. So those are the two sections of a French overture, and we need both sections for a French overture to be complete. Double dotted slow march, presto fugue. So the example I've asked you to listen to was the fugue from Atis. And this is a tragédie en musique by Lully. We'll hear a distinct division between these two parts. Now, each part gets repeated, and what you will hear is the double dotted slow march will also come back at the end. So they'll do the march, then they'll repeat the march, then they'll do the fugue, then they'll repeat the march. Does that make sense to everybody? March, march, fugue, march. Okay, good. So let's take, oh no, sorry, I want to talk too about the instrumentation here. What really distinguishes French orchestras is the presence of the 24 violons du roi, and that is the 24 violins of the king. This was a specific string ensemble pretty much owned by the king, as you can tell from their name. Why were they called 24? Well, I mean, they're 24 members, obviously, but the division of labor is 6 violins, so 6 of the highest string part. Then you would have 3 different sizes of viola. They're not the modern standard viola that we use today. These are 3 different sizes of viola. And each of those 3 sizes would have 4 players. So I've got 6 violins, 6 people on the highest part, then 4 plus 4 plus 4 in the middle on different size violas. And then I've got 6 cellos, so 6 on the lowest part, 6 on the highest and lowest, 4, 4, and 4 in the middle. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, see a couple thumbs. Good, I'm seeing more thumbs, okay. And that should be in your notes, guys. The 24 violins of the king should be in your notes. I don't care if you know it in French or not. I need you to know it in English for sure. Okay, so let's take a listen to this overture. And the question that I want you to meditate on as we listen to the overture is, how does this set a courtly scene? What about this sounds courtly to you? Okay, here we go. Very short piece. Let's just give it a listen. Okay, so we actually got to hear the whole overture there. How does that set a courtly scene for you? Or does it?
It kind of sounds like a dance song. Like, I don't want to say a waltz because that's like a very specific time signature, but I mean like the vibe of like a courtly dance song. If that makes sense.
It's very rhythmic, right? And in fact, Louis XIV prided himself on his dancing capability. In fact, which slide do I have on? Let me see here. Come on, Louis. Okay, that's him. That's Louis XIV. Maybe did I put him on the cover? No, I put Versailles on the cover. Ah, here it is. Okay, this is Louis XIV as Apollo. He's in a ballet here. This is the king playing the sun god. So the Sun King plays Apollo in the ballet. All this is a very long way of saying that the king himself was very much into participating in the dance. So yeah, basically a defining feature of French music is its danceability in any genre. Good ears. What else makes us feel like we might be at court here?
Okay, this might be dumb, but it reminds me of, so one of my favorite movies of all time is Man in the Iron Mask with Leonardo DiCaprio, and it reminds me of not when he's walking in, because when the king is walking in, it's more, I don't want to say dramatic, but yes, it's more dramatic, it's more powerful. This seems more in layman words, just like elegant and still powerful, but not like knock you on your butt powerful. The instruments and how it's phrased to me is what really defines that it's royal.
Yeah, John, that's an excellent connection because Dumas set The Man in the Iron Mask around this time, didn't he?
Yeah, it was about Louis. It was about King Louis.
Okay. What was it, Louis XIV or one of the other Louis?
It was about Louis the 14th.
Okay, good. So that's a great connection. That's absolutely the time and place that we're evoking. I want to pick apart what you said about that phrasing and the instrumentation because you're really on to something there. What about, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say the instrumentation of it. I mean, yes, it has to do with the time period of like with the harpsichord and the brass, but for not just king, but for royalship at that time, I believe if I remember right, the harpsichord was used in a lot of music, not all, but a lot. But with brass, it was used a lot, almost all the time in royal cadences and dances like this, because it, as I said earlier, it gave that like powerful, like, look at me, I'm kind of important vibe, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah. if there is one vibe that Louis gives off, it's look at me, I'm important.
Yeah, especially with Louis, because he, if you haven't seen Man in the Iron Mask, watch it, because he was very conceited. He was very, he didn't care about his people that much. He only cared about how he looked and what he did.
They don't call him the Sun King for nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great connection, and you're definitely spot on with this idea of the instrumentation being different from what we've heard before. Think back to our Italian opera when we have just basso continuo and singer, and it's very, when we have those ritornellos like in the canzonetta from Orfeo, that Vi ricordi o boschi ombrosi, those very brassy, right? We had a bunch of different things chiming in, whereas this is very string heavy, and that's kind of surprising given the tropes that we've discussed. So yeah, French music is far more string heavy than contemporary Italian stuff or contemporary German stuff. Violins were the instrument in France. And when I say violins, I mean every member of the violin family. So precisely, and that phrasing goes along with it because they don't have to stop and breathe, right? If you're not playing a wind instrument, you can have these long, continuous phrases. We're not dealing with Mozart, 4 measures, 4 measures, 4 measures, 4 measures. We're dealing with these long spun out sequences that just keep going, going, and going. Does that make sense to everybody? Good. I see. Good. Oh yeah, John. Okay, that wasn't a question. That was a genuinely feel good, John. Okay. Good. So that's French Overture. That is opera under Lully for you. But like I said, a generation later, we see another fellow come along, Jean-Philippe Rameau. Now, Rameau starts out as a prolific opera composer. He writes a ton of this stuff because by the time Rameau reached maturity, tragedies en musique had become the standard. Tragedies en musique were no longer a new invention by the time Rameau grew into adulthood. It was the thing in France. As I said, he turned theorist in later life and laid out a bunch of documents where he tells us the way French opera should work. And then it sparks this big debate between fans of Lully and fans of Rameau. And what this pamphlet war, this debate really is a series of cultural debates about tradition versus novelty. They're not just arguing about music here. They're arguing about what constitutes French culture. Opera represented politics more than other art forms because it was so closely associated with the crown. If royal opera does not sound the way the French think royal opera should, then what even is being French anymore? So these are larger cultural debates, even more than just about the notes on the page. Just like Lully worked with Quinault and Molière, Rameau, a generation later, worked with Voltaire, that guy who wrote Candide. He was an author who was known for those biting critiques of society, especially aristocratic society. And so this collaboration between the cream of the crop in poetry and the cream of the crop in music continues in France. Rameau, in contrast to Lully, Rameau was known for dramatic set pieces, specifically orchestral interludes that establish environment. They are meant to stun the audience. These orchestral interludes are about ambience, not action. He's creating soundscapes. He's doing something almost Wagnerian, 150 years before Wagner touches the subject. So these orchestral interludes are what spark the debates. In other words, the French audience is reacting to, wait a minute, you're doing too much with the orchestra, and this is not what French opera should be. And Rameau is saying, no, hold on, sit there while I awe you with my amazing instrumentation. Now, Rameau does have a wider variety of subgenres. So Lully focused his attention specifically on tragedies en musique, and Rameau kind of branches out. He does these things called opera ballets that are, instead of being 5 acts like tragedy en musique, they are just 3 to 4 acts. They're shorter. And rather than having a continuous plot, each act is a self-contained tableau. In other words, it's about the visual spectacle more than it is about a story. Rameau also does these things called pastorals. As you can tell just from the name, pastoral, this is going to be like that shepherd stuff going on. So we're talking about settings of mythology, settings of these idols. Okay. Now, under Rameau, divertissements really change. So rather than letting, rather than having these divertissements kind of come out of nowhere, Rameau decides to make them a part of the action. He uses these divertissements to deepen characterizations. We actually get to know the characters. This is an opportunity for the characters to step aside and tell us more about themselves. But again, like I said, above all, Rameau is most known for more complex orchestration. Those set pieces are the thing that set off the whole debate. Rameau is known for creating whole sound worlds for his dramas to exist in, and incorporating natural sounds stylized into music. No one writes a storm like Rameau. So he's using denser textures and harsher dissonances. And that's what separates Rameau from Lully, and that's what people are getting their panties in a wad over. Does that make sense to everyone? Can I get thumbs or hands? Okay, like 4 people feel okay. Good. Okay, good. So I said this is going to spread all over Europe, and that includes England. Now, just a little bit about England before we jump in. The musical landscape in England is vastly different from the musical landscape in any of the other countries we talked about. Why? Well, England is the land of Puritans. And Puritans have a very different relationship to music than just about anybody else. So let's talk a little bit about England itself before we get into the music. So the English Civil War from 1642 to 51, so almost a solid decade of fighting, was a conflict in which the Stuart monarchy, so the descendants of Mary, Queen of Scots, once her son James took the throne of England, they established the Stuart dynasty, okay? So the Stuarts, the descendants of Mary, Queen of Scots, were deposed, and Parliament wanted to take all the power. So we have what we call the Roundheads, and those are parliamentarians led by a guy named Oliver Cromwell. And we call them Roundheads because of the shape of their helmets. So the Roundheads, the parliamentarians, defeated the Cavaliers, who were the king's troops. And they behead Charles I. So Charles I is gone, and these Puritans establish what we call the Commonwealth instead of the Kingdom of England. Once England becomes the Commonwealth, it is run by strict Puritans and military men. So in the 17th century, not a lot of English people prize music. The problem is a lot of the citizenry doesn't like being told what to do by these military men. So what they do is the English citizens go back, they get Charles II, who was Charles I's son, and they make Charles II, who was exiled in Scotland, they make Charles II the new king once Oliver Cromwell dies. So basically, Oliver Cromwell comes over, takes control for a couple decades, and then gets the boot. So that period when Charles II comes back is called the Restoration, because they are restoring the monarchy. So Charles II takes back control of England during the Restoration. And this period of the Restoration also includes Charles II's son, James II. So the Restoration extends through two kings. The problem with James II is that James II is a Catholic, and the English don't like that. They're still recovering from Puritan rule. Now they're going to go complete opposite direction into Catholicism? I don't think so. So what the English do is invite James II's daughter Mary and her husband William of Orange to invade England. The English citizens are inviting the king's daughter and her husband to invade England and claim the throne, purely because Mary and William are Protestant. Okay, so if I can sum this whole period up in one sentence, it is warfare and Puritanism. Does that make sense to everybody? And that's what I want you to take away: warfare, Puritanism. Okay. With that in mind, let's look at the different types of English music that were around during this period. Well, we've got what we call masques, and these are court genres, much like the other genres we've talked about so far. These are courtly genres. These were developed in England during the 1500s and 1600s, and it started out as simply a masked dance. That's how you get the name mask, right? So people would dress up in costumes. It's like Halloween, but every day. Yay! And they would put on these like allegorical and mythical themed nights, if you will. And not only would it be a dance, they would recite poetry, they would play music, there would be these elaborate sets. So these court masks kind of ballooned into their own thing, their own separate dramatic genre. And the leading composer of these court masks is a guy named Ben Jonson. Now, in addition to those court masks, we have what we call theater masks. These theater masks are not meant for everybody to participate in. So now we actually have a select group of performers who are acting out a story. And we can call them theater masks, or we can call them semi-operas. So now they're doing the poetry, they're doing the music, they're doing the elaborate sets, but now it's a select group of performers as opposed to everybody at court dancing. Does everybody understand the difference between a court mask and a theater mask? Can I get a thumb or a hand? Let me elaborate a little more. Holy cow, there are only 11 of you left. 10 of you, because I'm one of the 11. Good. Oh, yay. So the court masks are things where everybody participates. If you're invited, you dress up, you dance, you take on a character, you take part in the evening. Theater masks are similar, except now you are an audience member watching performers do that. Does that simplify it? Thumbs or hands? Okay, I'll take it. Good. Okay. So those are masks. Other genres that are cropping up in England are ballad operas. Now, this is a distinctly English genre. We don't see ballad operas anywhere else. If I say ballad opera, you guys should say England. Ballad opera, England. Ballad opera, England. Okay. These ballad operas are a lot like modern musicals in that we've got spoken dialogue alternating with pop songs. And these would be like lifted from the pop music of the day. These aren't newly composed songs. They are traditional or popular tunes, and often then what the writer would do is just write new words for the tune so that it would fit the storyline. So they're taking melodies and songs from pop culture and just putting new words with it. It's kind of like Luther's Contrafacta, right? Where he takes popular songs and puts religious words to them. In this case, we've got pop songs and then the writer will put new words with it to match the story. The prime example of this is a piece by a guy named John Gay, and it's called The Beggar's Opera. I said this genre was similar to modern musicals. Does anybody know what modern musical is based on The Beggar's Opera?
What's it about?
Question, Nathan. It is about a complete reprobate named Mac or Macheath, and he is promising to marry his boss thief's daughter, but then he gets himself into a bunch of trouble and he's about to be executed when all of a sudden he gets a reprieve from the king. It's kind of a deus ex machina. So then he basically gets forced into marrying the boss thief's daughter. If I say Mac the Knife, does that ring a bell?
No.
Okay, Three Penny Opera. Kurt Weill's Three Penny Opera is based on John Gay's The Beggar's Opera. So Macheath becomes Mac the Knife in the Three Penny Opera. But that's a side note. The thing that I need you to know for today is The Beggar's Opera. Now, John Gay starts out writing The Beggar's Opera as satire, social criticism. He's really taking a whack at English society through this music. And from there, other writers kind of took it in the direction of pure farce. And what I mean by that, the distinction between satire and farce is that satire is actually social commentary. Farce is pure comedy without the commentary. So John Gay writes The Beggar's Opera as a form of satire to really make us examine. Oh, question?
No, sorry, I was joining. I was joining from my phone so that I could walk to class.
Gotcha. Okay, so yeah, this starts out as social commentary and then just becomes pure comedy. And the final English genre that we should know about are semi-operas. Those like theater masks I told you about. These are very similar to theater masks. Semi-operas and theater masks are really, 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 really similar. They're also, you'll see them called dramatic operas in the source texts, spelled with a K, because why not? And dictionaries didn't quite exist yet. So dramatic operas, semi-operas, theater masks. The difference between a semi-opera and a theater mask is really the prominence of dance. So you will see more ballet in a semi-opera than you would see in a theater mask. The theater mask is more about the music and poetry. Semi-operas have a greater prominence of dance. And these can be comic or tragic. And so you'll see this is related to a lot of the contemporary French forms. So there's a lot of similarity between what's going on in French opera and what's going on in the semi-operas. So the last thing we'll do for today, because I only have 3 minutes left here. The last thing I want to do today is introduce the leading English opera composer, and that is a guy named Henry Purcell. Now, notice his years here. He's working in the courts of Charles II and James II. So he's working during the Restoration. He's working as the monarchy is being restored. Then he's working as William and Mary of Orange are coming in to replace her dad. So he's working in a very tumultuous time. And the Glorious Revolution is really when Purcell's theater music is allowed to flourish. Because before it's warfare, right? We don't have time to write much music while we're fighting for our lives. So you don't see a lot of his theater music from the Restoration period. His theater music comes from this period. Much like the French, Purcell is writing these very simple airs. They're folk-like, and in fact, one big characteristic of Purcell's music is that many of his airs sound like folk songs. He's mostly known for his semi-operas, the spoken stuff with dance, but the one work that everybody looks to for him is an actual opera called Dido and Aeneas from rather late in his career. This is very mature Purcell. During his own life, the semi-operas were prominent. So Dido and Aeneas gets forgotten until the 1890s, when people start to ask, wait a minute, what about English opera? What happened to England during those centuries of the proliferation of vocal music? So in the 1890s, notice this is 200 years after Purcell's death, people start to rediscover Dido and Aeneas, and it becomes the defining work of Purcell's career. Next time, we'll pick up with an excerpt from Dido and Aeneas. So I want to talk about that first thing next time. But before we log off, does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, could at the beginning of class, were we talking about like an upcoming assignment or anything? I might have missed that.
Okay, good. So at the beginning of class, Jared asked when I was going to talk about the reading response project.
Okay.
And I want to do that next Wednesday when we have the listening quiz, because I feel like that's the only time that people attend things. So I think my best shot at talking to the class will be on a listening quiz day.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Awesome.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Have a great day, y'all.